You know the saying, ignorance is bliss? Well, let me tell you, it's a load of crap. Ignorance is a ticking time bomb, and mine was about to explode in the worst way possible. Alex leaned against the kitchen counter, a half-eaten sandwich forgotten in his hand. It was the day before his wedding, a day that should have been filled with last-minute prep and giddy nerves. Instead, he was staring at his phone, reeling from the shock of a message he'd never expected to see. It was from Mark, his best man. "Hey man, I think you need to see this. Sorry." Attached was a photo that burned into his retinas and clenched his stomach into knots. Emily, his soon-to-be wife, in a way he'd never imagined, in the arms of another man. Alex's first thought was denial. "It's a mistake," he told himself. "It has to be." But as he zoomed in on the photo, the truth was undeniable. There she was, laughing, looking happier than he'd seen her in months, and definitely not with him. He felt a cocktail of emotions: betrayal, confusion, hurt swirling inside him. He wanted to confront her, demand answers, but he also dreaded the confrontation. What if it was all true? What if the woman he loved, the woman he was about to marry, was living a lie? With a shaky breath, Alex composed himself and dialed Emily's number. The phone rang, each tone echoing his pounding heart. Finally, she answered. "Hey, babe, everything okay?" Emily's voice was light, unsuspecting. "Emily, we need to talk. Now." Alex tried to keep his voice steady. "What's wrong? You're scaring me." "It's about the photo, Emily. The photo Mark sent me." There was a pause, a silence that spoke volumes, before she whispered, "Alex, I can explain." Alex's heart sank. The confirmation hit him like a freight train. This was real. "I'm listening," he said, a mixture of anger and sorrow lacing his words. I never meant for you to find out this way," Emily began, her voice trembling. "It just happened. I was confused, and I made a mistake." "A mistake? Emily, we're getting married tomorrow. How could you?" Alex's voice broke, the pain evident. I know, and I'm so sorry. I was going to end it, I swear. I love you, Alex." But her words, once comforting, now felt hollow. How could he trust her? How could he marry her knowing she'd been unfaithful? "I need some time, Emily. I need to think." Alex hung up, feeling a strange mix of clarity and disarray. The room spun around him as he sat down, the reality of the situation crashing over him. The wedding, their future, everything they'd planned, it all seemed like a distant dream now. Alex knew he had a decision to make. He could confront Emily, cancel the wedding, and expose the truth. Or he could bury his feelings and go through with it, keeping the peace for the sake of their families. But deep down, he knew that some truths were too big to hide. As the night crept in, Alex sat alone, a man at a crossroads, his life changed forever by a single, unexpected revelation. Alex paced the length of his small, dimly lit living room, his mind racing faster than his feet. The photo on his phone, sent by his best man, Mark, showed Emily, his fiancée, in a way that shattered his heart, in an intimate embrace with someone else. He had confronted her, and her tearful admission only deepened the wound. The clock ticked past midnight, the silence of the apartment amplifying his turbulent thoughts. He glanced at the wedding suit hanging on the door, a symbol of a future that was now tainted with betrayal. Cancel the wedding? He muttered to himself. The thought had crossed his mind, but the idea of dealing with the fallout made him hesitate. Their families, the guests, the non-refundable deposits, it all seemed overwhelming. Yet, the thought of standing at the altar with Emily after this felt impossible. He picked up his phone again, scrolling through the messages from Emily. Her apologies, her pleas for forgiveness, they seemed so empty now. Alex felt a surge of anger, not just at her, but at himself for being so blind. In a moment of clarity, he made a decision. He wouldn't go public with the scandal. That wasn't his style. He would handle this quietly, with dignity. He started typing out messages to the closest family and friends, a vague but urgent request to postpone the wedding due to unforeseen circumstances. The responses were a mix of confusion and concern, but Alex wasn't ready to share the real reason. Not yet. With each message sent, he felt a weight lifting off his chest, but it was quickly replaced by a gnawing sense of emptiness. He slumped onto the couch, the events of the evening playing over in his head like a cruel movie. Then, an idea began to form. A plan for revenge? Maybe. But more than that, a plan to find some semblance of justice for himself. It wasn't about hurting Emily, it was about regaining control over his own life. He didn't want to sink to dirty tricks or public shaming. No, Alex wanted something more, something that would give him closure and maybe, just maybe, teach Emily a lesson about consequences. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Hesitant, he opened it to find Mark, his best man, standing there, a mix of concern and guilt on his face. "Alex, man, I'm so sorry. I didn't know how to tell you." Mark's voice trailed off as he stepped inside. "It's not your fault, Mark. I'm glad you told me," Alex replied, managing a weak smile. The two friends sat down, and Alex shared his thoughts, his plans. Mark listened, offering a sounding board and occasionally playing the devil's advocate. As the night turned into the early hours of the morning, Alex's plan began to take shape. It wasn't elaborate, but it was symbolic. He would confront Emily and her lover, face to face. He wanted to see the truth in their eyes, hear it in their voices. And then, he would walk away, leaving them to deal with the mess they'd made. He would start a new chapter of his life, one where he wasn't the victim of someone else's selfish choices. Sure, the road ahead was uncertain, filled with the debris of broken dreams and plans, but Alex felt a strange sense of resolve. I always thought I knew how my life would go, you know? But there I was, the night before what should have been my wedding, feeling like I'd been tossed into some twisted soap opera. Alex sat alone in his dimly lit living room, a half-empty bottle of whiskey on the coffee table, his mind a whirlwind. He kept replaying the scene. Discovering the photo of Emily with someone else, her tearful confession over the phone, the crushing weight of betrayal. The world outside was silent, oblivious to the turmoil inside him. He glanced at his phone, littered with unread messages and missed calls. Friends and family were worried. The wedding was tomorrow, and here he was, radio silent. Alex sighed, rubbing his temples. How do you explain that your perfect life just imploded? His thoughts drifted to Emily. They had been together for 5 years of memories, plans, and dreams. Now, it felt like a house of cards that had collapsed with a single, careless touch. Maybe I should just get out of town, Alex muttered to himself, toying with the idea of escaping it all. But running away wouldn't solve anything. He needed closure, a way to make sense of this mess. He remembered Mark's words earlier that evening, urging him to think things through, not to act on impulse. Good advice, but hard to follow when every emotion was screaming for action. Alex took a deep breath, trying to clear his head. The whiskey wasn't helping. It just made the pain and anger swirl together into a dizzying mix. He needed a plan, not just a reaction. Something that would let him confront Emily and her lover, to understand why, to get the truth. But what then? Expose them? Shame them? It all seemed so petty, yet the hurt part of him wanted to lash out, to hurt them like they hurt him. He stood up, pacing the room, his mind racing. Maybe he could talk to Emily again, face to face this time. But the thought of seeing her, seeing the guilt in her eyes, it was almost too much. He felt betrayed, yes, but also a strange sense of loss. Despite everything, he still loved her. Or at least, he loved the person he thought she was. His phone buzzed, breaking his train of thought. It was a message from Emily. Alex, please, we need to talk. I'm so sorry, I'll do anything to make this right. His thumb hovered over the screen, torn between the urge to reply and the desire to just throw the phone away. Then, a different kind of resolve settled in him. He wouldn't let this situation destroy him. He would face Emily, hear her out, but on his terms. He needed closure, not revenge. With a newfound sense of purpose, Alex started typing a message. Not to Emily, but to her lover. It was time to meet the other man in this twisted triangle. Face to face, man to man. Alex wasn't looking for a confrontation, just answers. Maybe then he could start picking up the pieces of his broken life. Have you ever had one of those moments where you feel like you're in a movie? That was me, standing outside a coffee shop at the crack of dawn, waiting to meet the guy who turned my life upside down. Alex took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of emotions raging inside him. After a sleepless night, he had decided to confront Emily's lover, the mysterious man from the photo. His heart pounded with a mix of anger, betrayal, and an unsettling curiosity. The city was just waking up, the early morning light casting long shadows on the pavement. Alex watched people pass by, lost in their own worlds, oblivious to the drama unfolding in his. He checked his phone for the umpteenth time. There it was, the message he had sent to Emily's lover last night. We need to talk. Meet me at the Daily Grind. 6 a.m. Don't make me look for you. To his surprise, the guy had agreed. As he waited, Alex's mind replayed the past few days. The discovery of Emily's infidelity, the whirlwind of emotions, the cancelled wedding. It all seemed surreal, like a bad dream he couldn't wake up from. Then, he saw him. The man from the photo, walking towards the coffee shop. He was taller than Alex had imagined, with a confident stride that irked him even more. As he approached, Alex felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it, the moment of truth. Alex? The man extended his hand, but Alex didn't take it. Cut the formalities. Why? Why her? Alex's voice was steady but laced with a barely contained rage. The man sighed, running a hand through his hair. Look, I didn't know she was engaged. She never mentioned you. By the time I found out, it was complicated. Alex scoffed. Complicated? You're talking about my life here. I'm sorry, man, I really am. If I could turn back time, I would. There was a sincerity in his tone that took Alex aback. He had expected defiance, maybe even arrogance, but not remorse. They sat down at a nearby table, the early morning crowd buzzing around them. The conversation that followed was tense but necessary. The man, whose name was Jake, explained how he met Emily, how their casual friendship had evolved into something more. He talked about his own guilt, how he had ended things when he learned about Alex. As Alex listened, his anger slowly gave way to a sad realization. Emily's betrayal was deeper than he had thought. It wasn't just a fleeting mistake, it was a series of choices that had shattered their relationship. "Does she love you?" Alex finally asked, a question that had been burning inside him. Jake shook his head. "No. It was never about love. We were both just lost, I guess." The conversation ended with no dramatic conclusion, no explosive argument. Just two men, coming to terms with their shared pain. Alex left the coffee shop feeling a mixture of relief and emptiness. He had the answers he sought, but they didn't bring the satisfaction he had hoped for. As he walked back through the waking city, he realized that this was just the beginning of his journey. A journey of healing, of moving on, of rebuilding his life from the ashes of a broken relationship. Ever wander through your own past like a ghost? That's what I did, the day after my world got flipped. I walked through our favorite park, the one where Emily and I had planned to have our wedding photos taken. Alex strolled down the familiar paths of Greenway Park, each step stirring a memory. The laughter, the plans, the dreams that he and Emily had shared, now felt like echoes from another life. The park was quiet, with only the gentle rustle of leaves and the distant chatter of early morning joggers for company. He found himself at the old oak tree, their tree, where they had carved their initials years ago. Alex traced the letters with his finger, a bitter smile on his face. Love had seemed so simple back then. As he sat on the bench nearby, he thought about the confrontation with Jake, Emily's lover. It hadn't gone as he expected. There was no satisfaction, no closure. Just a profound sense of loss. His phone buzzed with a message from Mark, his best man. "Hey, how you holding up? Need to talk?" Mark had been his rock through this whole mess, but Alex wasn't ready to talk. Not yet. Instead, he watched a young couple walking hand in hand, laughing without a care in the world. He wondered if they knew how fragile it all was, how quickly happiness could turn to heartbreak. Alex's mind wandered to the future, to the life he had planned with Emily. A house in the suburbs, kids playing in the yard, growing old together. Now, it all seemed like a naive fantasy. He pulled out his phone again, scrolling through the photos of him and Emily. There they were, smiling at a friend's barbecue, kissing under the fireworks on the 4th of July, posing in front of their first apartment. With each swipe, the wound in his heart deepened. Then, he paused at a photo of Emily looking off into the distance, a pensive expression on her face. He remembered the day they took that photo, how she had seemed distant, lost in thought. Had there been signs of her unhappiness that he had missed? Alex felt a twinge of something he hadn't expected: empathy. For the first time since the revelation, he wondered what Emily had been going through, what had driven her to someone else's arms. It didn't excuse her actions, but it made him see the complexity of their situation. He stood up, feeling the weight of his loneliness. He had lost more than a fiancé, he had lost a part of himself. The part that believed in happy endings, in undying love. As he left the park, the sun broke through the clouds, casting a warm glow over the paths and trees. It was beautiful and serene, a stark contrast to the turmoil inside him. Alex decided to stop by his parents' house. They had been his support since he was a kid, and he needed their wisdom now more than ever. As he walked, he realized that this journey wasn't just about getting over Emily. It was about understanding himself, his needs, and his capacity to forgive. Have you ever noticed how the quietest moments often scream the loudest in your mind? That was me, sitting in my old room at my parents' house, surrounded by childhood trophies and high school yearbooks, feeling like a stranger in my own past. Alex sat on the edge of his childhood bed, the events of the last few days replaying in his head like a broken record. The confrontation with Emily's lover, the cancelled wedding, and now, the threat of a legal battle looming over him. He gazed out the window, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. His phone lay silent beside him, a stark contrast to the barrage of messages and calls he had been receiving. Friends, family, even colleagues, everyone had something to say about what had happened. Some were supportive, others critical, and a few uncomfortably inquisitive. Alex picked up his phone, scrolling through the messages. He paused at a text from Emily, sent earlier that day. "Alex, we need to talk. This is getting out of hand." He had read it a dozen times, each reading stirring a mix of anger and sorrow. He thought about responding, about trying to find some common ground before things escalated further. But the hurt was too deep, the betrayal too raw. He couldn't face her, not yet. Instead, he opened his laptop and started typing, pouring his thoughts into a letter. Not to Emily, but to himself. It was a way to process everything, to try and make sense of the chaos. As he wrote, he reflected on the relationship, the good times, the bad times, and everything in between. He thought about what he could have done differently, what signs he might have missed. It wasn't about assigning blame, but about understanding, about finding closure. He wrote about his fears for the future, about starting over, about the daunting prospect of trusting someone again. He wrote until the words blurred on the screen, his emotions spent. Finally, he closed his laptop, feeling a sense of release. It wasn't a solution, but it was a start. Alex lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. He thought about the legal battle that Emily had threatened, about the public scrutiny that was already starting to build. Part of him wanted to fight, to stand his ground. But another part, a weary, broken part, just wanted it all to end. He realized then that this wasn't just about Emily or the wedding or the affair. It was about him, about who he was and who he wanted to be. The Alex before the betrayal wouldn't have recognized the man lying in this bed, consumed by anger and hurt. He needed to find that Alex again, the one who believed in love and trust, who saw the world not just for its flaws, but for its possibilities. As night fell, Alex made a decision. He would meet with Emily, not to lash out or accuse, but to talk, to try and find a path forward that didn't involve courts or lawyers or public spectacle. He sent her a message, short and to the point. Let's meet. We need to sort this out, face to face. You know, there's something about old diners that feels like stepping back in time. That's where I found myself, in a booth at Joe's Diner, waiting to have the most awkward conversation of my life with Emily. Alex stared at the worn-out menu, though he had no appetite. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the smell of coffee and fried eggs filled the air. This was their spot, where he and Emily used to come for late-night bites during their early dating days. Now, it felt like a relic from a different era. His thoughts were interrupted as Emily slid into the booth across from him. She looked tired, her eyes lacking the sparkle that had first drawn him in. For a moment, he saw a glimpse of the woman he had fallen in love with, and his heart ached with a mix of sadness and nostalgia. Thanks for meeting me, Emily started, her voice hesitant. Alex nodded, unsure how to start. We need to talk about everything. Emily sighed, looking down at her hands. I know I messed up, Alex. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want you to understand why I did it. Alex leaned back, his arms crossed. I'm listening. It wasn't about you, she began, her voice quivering. It was about me. I was feeling lost, unsure about the future. And then, Jake came along, and he was different. Exciting. I got caught up in something I knew was wrong. Alex's grip tightened on the edge of the table. Hearing her admit it so bluntly was a punch to the gut. He wanted to be angry, to yell and demand answers, but he also knew he needed to hear her out. Why didn't you talk to me? If you were having doubts, we could have worked it out, Alex said, his voice tinged with hurt. I was scared, Emily admitted. Scared of disappointing you. Scared of admitting that I wasn't as sure about our future as you were. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Alex realized that while he had been blindsided by her betrayal, there had been signs of her unhappiness. He had just been too wrapped up in his own vision of their life together to see them. So, what now? Alex asked, his voice softening. I don't know, Emily replied, looking up at him with tear-filled eyes. I just know I can't undo the past. I can only try to learn from it and move forward. Alex nodded, understanding. As much as he wanted to hate her, to blame her for everything, he knew it wasn't that simple. They had both made mistakes, they had both ignored the signs. I think we both need time, Alex said. Time to figure out who we are on our own. Emily reached across the table, her hand hovering as if unsure whether to touch him. I really am sorry, Alex. He met her hand halfway, a brief connection that spoke volumes. I know. As they left the diner, the early morning light was breaking over the horizon. It felt symbolic, like the end of one chapter and the uncertain beginning of another. Alex walked down the street, feeling a strange sense of closure. The pain was still there, but it was no longer consuming him. He knew the road ahead would be tough, but for the first time in a long time, he felt ready to face it. Ever hit rock bottom and realize the only way left to go is up? That's how I felt, sitting alone in my apartment, the aftermath of a hurricane called my former life spread out before me. Alex tossed another crumpled piece of paper across the room, adding to the growing pile. Each sheet contained his attempts to pen down his thoughts, his feelings, his next steps. But nothing seemed right. The words felt hollow, just like the void in his chest. He got up and walked over to the window, the city lights blinking back at him like distant stars. It had been weeks since the meeting with Emily at the diner, weeks since he had agreed to settle things without dragging them through court. A decision that had brought relief, but no real closure. His phone buzzed, a reminder of his upcoming meeting with his lawyer to finalize the settlement agreement. Alex sighed, realizing that no legal document could mend the scars left on his heart. He thought back to the conversation with Emily, the raw honesty, the unshed tears. It was a conversation that had cracked open the door to understanding, but the path to forgiveness still seemed miles away. As he stood there, lost in thought, his eye caught a photo on the shelf. It was an old picture of him and his college buddies at a football game, faces painted, arms around each other, the epitome of carefree youth. A stark contrast to the man he had become. In a spur-of-the-moment decision, Alex picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in years. The line rang, and then a familiar voice answered. Alex? Man, it's been ages. How are you? Hearing his old friend's voice brought a flood of memories. They talked, reminisced, and laughed, a balm to Alex's wounded soul. His friend's words were a reminder of who Alex used to be, of the dreams and hopes he once had. After the call, Alex felt a shift within him. It was subtle, but it was there, a flicker of something he thought he had lost: hope. He sat down again, this time with a renewed sense of purpose. He began to write, not about the past, but about the future. He wrote about what he had learned, about his mistakes, about his aspirations. The words flowed freely, each sentence a step towards healing. It was late when he finished, the first light of dawn creeping through the blinds. Alex read over what he had written, a sense of peace settling over him. It wasn't a plan set in stone, but it was a start, a roadmap to finding himself again. He decided to take a trip, to get away from the city, the memories, and the pain. A solo journey to clear his head and to reconnect with the parts of himself he had lost.